next panel is AI in business, pioneering industries in the next economic frontier. I think it's clear by everything we have seen this and heard this morning, we know AI is not optional, it is necessary to be competitive. It is reshaping industries, it's reshaping how we think, how we make money. It's changing everything, and that brings a lot of uncertainty, ethical concerns. I mean, kind of as Paolo said, some things you don't know until you're in it, what is happening, what the next thing is. So we're going to have a discussion about that. And I have three remarkable people that I'm going to bring to the stage who have been staged, as it were, who are ready to dive into this topic to talk about ways that the products that are the here, the now, the future, what some of the ethical concerns are of how we address these challenges and how we monetize as the industry changes. So I'm going to step aside and allow them to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right in.
Hi everybody, I'm Todd Parsons. I lead product for Criteo, which is pretty well known for what is called retail media these days, helping retailers monetize their on-site and app presences with advertising.
Hi everyone, I'm Diana Schildhouse. I'm the Chief Analytics and Insights Officer at Colgate-Palmolive. My role spans global data science, advanced analytics, AI, both traditional predictive AI as well as generative AI, as well as consumer insights. And we are a multinational consumer goods company operating in more than 200 countries worldwide.
And I'm David Wong. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Thomson Reuters, and I lead the product organization which builds everything at Thomson Reuters which is not news. So that's actually about 90% of our business at Thomson Reuters. So we serve lawyers, accountants, tax professionals, and risk professionals with software and data solutions. And a lot of what I've been doing over the past 2 years is the application of generative AI into those systems.
Thank you all very much. The first question I have is for all three of you. Which sectors are currently at the forefront of AI adoption, and what lessons can we learn from how they have succeeded and, I won't say failed, but the challenges that they have had along the way?
Well, I mean, just turning inward a little bit, we look at our stakeholders being advertisers, brands that are looking to get their products discovered, the platforms that are producing content where that might be a meaningful place to do it, and the retailers that are actually selling or merchandising those products. So at the confluence of those three parties, there's a tremendous amount of change underway that touches everything from the consumer experience and using AI to make that experience more relevant, not necessarily always more personal because of the privacy implications and the data security implications around that, but a more personal experience, a better advertising experience delivered by auto generation, auto optimization, proxies for measurement, and indeed all the way down into logistics. If you think about how retail is changing, yes, again, think of those three groups, everything is quite disrupted between the three of them. They're all coming closer together for a better way for consumers to discover things, validate them, and buy them, which means the entire stack is being transformed. And I would say these are spaces that are quite far ahead, at least in the consumer experience part of the journey.
So I'll speak about the consumer goods industry, obviously, and some of the learnings that we've had there. So, at Colgate, we're about probably 4 or 5 years into our overall analytics and data and AI transformation. In the last couple of years, of course, with generative AI, I think a couple of the learnings that have really, stood out for us in terms of our own experience has been first around the importance of value creation. So we think about any kind of emerging technology, whether it's Gen AI or traditional predictive AI, as not just something that we're going to pursue as sort of tech first or tech for tech's sake. It actually needs to drive value for the company in the end. So it's not about buzzwords and hype, it's really about how it fits with the strategic priorities of your company and your industry, and how you can actually drive real business value through the use of it. Again, whether it's Gen AI or traditional AI. Another learning I'd say is around change management. So, in the end, we can build the most sophisticated tools and roll out really exciting products for our teams to use internally, but in the end, if they don't actually understand how to use it and how to adopt and embed it in their processes, then teams like mine will not be driving the kind of impact that we know we should be. So that change management, the role of kind of human behavior in adoption of Gen AI has been a big learning for us in terms of successes.
Yeah. Maybe I'll step back a little bit. I like the question because it's asking about like how is the industry and which industries are being impacted. And we serve so many different industries at Thomson Reuters, so pretty much all corporations as well as all professional services. And we're starting to see sort of two groups emerge. One which is companies which actually build and deliver AI, so a lot of software companies which are transforming the way they have to deliver their service. So like Criteo, for example, you have to think about how you put AI into your product that is delivered to customers. But then we see almost every other company want to use AI to operate their companies. So like at Colgate-Palmolive, you're not selling AI to people, but you are using AI. And so we're seeing that sort of bifurcation, and the impact is pretty different between those two different kinds of companies out there. If we reflect on Thomson Reuters business, we certainly see rapid adoption within any data or business information services business, where there's just a really good match to the Gen AI technology and the applications which are there, as well as professional services, who are the consumers of a lot of those products.
I want to go back to something Diana said, and I saw you in particular, David, nodding when she said this, that you don't go and try or adopt some new AI thing just for the sake of doing it if it doesn't mesh with what your company is and what your company does. Have you found that some companies do or don't get that?
Well, I mean, I think there is a lot of experimentation going on. I actually don't think it's a bad thing at all for people to try for trying's sake. But the moment you want to invest and put money behind it, you have to have a really strong hypothesis around what part of your business, what part of your value chain are you going to get a benefit from the AI technology. So if it's in manufacturing, or if it's in legal, or if it's in your finance function, that you have a good idea about what's the benefit. Are you going to get a labor savings, or you get better outcomes, and then to apply it and measure whether or not that actually happens. And I think the best companies are doing that in a disciplined way.
What are the most effective approaches for businesses to monetize AI technologies? And that kind of actually is a bit of what I just asked. But Todd, did you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think I can just build on what David just said. I think there are different horizons for finding the value in AI, and monetization is just one way to find value. The things that are sort of more obvious today, and remember, this is a platform that is still fairly poorly understood by most of its users, and the use cases aren't so obvious for all of us sitting here in this room, besides what we might see at the tip of our nose. So you have the operational use of AI that David was calling out, the things that are value generating. They might save costs. They might help you operate much more efficiently with the cost base that you currently have. Those things are getting more and more obvious for us. What's harder are the things that are more in the mid and the long term. And again, because the platform itself isn't fully understood like mobile was or the internet was beforehand, those are use cases that are much more speculative, but they still really, we observe they still need to be invested in. So a way to think about that from a product perspective is to take things which are incredibly tangible and near term and build a program around those. And then to potentially place a couple of more midterm bets where you're looking at things that might stretch into use cases that you're not sure are going to land with great scale, but they're important to put an innovation from an innovation perspective for your company. And then you've got sort of the wild west of opportunities, again, going back to retail and advertising. One has to think about sort of agentic interactions that we as consumers are having in order to discover a product, or an advertisement is going to be used as content to inform that. Those are wild and a little further out, but all of these are happening on a shorter time continuum than I've seen as a product professional before. So it's important to sort of separate them from my perspective in terms of building the investment hypothesis for each, and then as a whole portfolio.
Diana?
Yeah, just wanted to build on something that David mentioned around the discipline of looking at value. So I think, how you think about driving value or monetizing AI for different companies or different industries is going to vary. But the way we've thought about it for Colgate is kind of a couple lenses. So one is growth and innovation, and then the other is efficiencies. So we've developed a framework for measuring all of the AI and advanced analytics work that we're doing across that. So it can be buckets like revenue growth. Are we driving incremental revenue through the use of these tools and technologies? Things like spend optimization. So are we increasing our ROI on investments we're making in media, for example? Efficiencies, time saved, open source capabilities. So there's different ways that you can apply that value lens. But I think the key point in that is, determining what the end objective is, whether it is growth or efficiency, and actually making sure that you're monitoring and measuring and setting any kind of test or experimental programs up for success, so that you can, quickly determine, okay, this one is not as much of an opportunity. This one has a lot of potential, and then we're going to, to David's point, we're going to put more investment behind that. And I think that, that approach will vary across, again, what kind of company or industry that you're in, but the importance is having that framework to look at actually driving value, because that's what we're trying to do in the end with AI.
Yeah. And then I think from my perspective as a product person, monetizing AI is, I think, kind of a sort of a strange question, because it's like saying, how do you monetize cloud or how do you monetize a database? It's from my perspective, it's often just a tool, right? And it's useful and it's monetized in a product if it does the job that the product does better than whatever previous technology there was. So as an example, one of the products that we sell is Westlaw, which is one of the biggest legal research databases in the world. We found that GenAI is really great at information retrieval and getting to answers faster. And so we're not really monetizing AI, we're building a better version of Westlaw. And I think that's going to be a common pattern that we'll see, which is AI will be there, AI will be used as a tool, but it'll show up as better versions, better and potentially transformative versions of software, tools, products, which ultimately people use.
I can tell you wanted to say something.
No, I just was vigorously agreeing and reflecting on the different ways we think about it as well. Like, we're very focused now on value creating things that are tangible, and then experimenting, to my earlier point, with things that aren't so clear. One has to do both, no matter what the industry you're in. But applying a discipline to that is relatively straightforward, the way that David laid it out.
What products or businesses underpinned by Gen AI have performed very well, exceeded expectations, and which have fallen short? Who wants to take that one?
Start.
Not all at once.
You're right.
I can start. I'll give our perspective. So, a couple areas early on that we thought would be great in terms of potential to drive value from Gen AI were product innovation, and then marketing and media, specifically kind of content and things like product detail pages if you're shopping online and such. And I'll speak a little bit about innovation. So if you think about the innovation process at a company that's creating consumer products, for example, there are different steps in that life cycle. So you first want to look at, we're a very people-centric company, so we'll look at all the consumer insights research work that we've done to look at what is a pain point or a need we're solving for a consumer, making sure we're creating products that tie to that. And then there's a sort of the concept generation stage where you're iterating on new products that might fit those consumer needs. And then there's testing. So of course we want to test with people, get feedback as we're refining. And what we found is that Gen AI has sped up all of the steps in that process for us with tools that we've built, some internally, some with partners, and are now scaling globally. So on the insights part, we're working with a company called Market Logic. It's basically putting a Gen AI overlay on our library of all of the information we have in terms of proprietary consumer research internally. So the way people search now, you don't want to search and get 10 PDFs back. You want to just ask your question if you're a marketer trying to create a new concept and get the answer. And so we have a tool called Deep Sites that we've launched globally where people can get answers and they're sourced, importantly. So the answer is generated and here are the 3 documents and this is the page number that the answer came from, so people can trust it. With concept generation, we've built a tool internally that we've scaled that just lets our marketers, in a way where they don't have to prompt engineer, just sort of a point and click interface, create 10, 100, 1,000 concept ideas that fit those needs. And of course, you always need a human in the loop in this. We're not just sort of moving to launch products that are being generated by AI, but that significantly speeds up that process of coming up with ideas. And then when it comes to testing with consumers, we've built digital twins internally where we can just rapidly, in that early stage, get some feedback on what a consumer might say about a product idea. We still absolutely test with real humans before we're launching anything, but it just lets everyone move through the funnel of that process so much more quickly. So for us, that's been an area where we've seen a lot of value already from Gen AI.
One thing we've done at Thomson Reuters is we've done this internal program where we've looked at every single one of our business functions and have gone out to the market and basically said, what's out there and what do we want to experiment with and what we want to try? And so this is more born out of our experience trying and testing different solutions, but we've seen real great success with software engineering. So the Copilot, the GitHub Copilots, the software engineering tools, they are showing real impact. That you see real efficiency gains, higher quality, faster error remediation as a result of those tools. I think that's been a huge win. That industry is, I think, in the process of being completely transformed with Gen AI. We've seen incredible success actually with sales enablement. We were surprised by that. So a lot of these generative AI sort of recording tools where you can take notes from sales calls, do follow-ups, the efficiencies from some of those tools has been amazing. And then legal. I mean, we use our own products, so we might be experts at our own stuff, but we've seen real benefits there. I think the places where we've not seen the impact, and this is interesting because they're popular, but we just don't see the business impact, is in a lot of these general horizontal tools. So we've tried rolling out things like ChatGPT Enterprise and Copilot, and they're really popular, but we don't see business impact. We can't tie it to a better outcome or a cost savings or efficiency as directly as some of the domain-specific tools.
Yeah, I would just build on that and say same experience. Obviously, Criteo is a technology shop, so we've seen great gains from how we're using AI in our development, kind of end-to-end our development pipeline. But just emphasizing the point that it's not so clear for a business user like myself, who is trying to train myself up on the use of Copilot every day, exactly how to count the step function and efficiency. The way we look at it is we definitely try to isolate those places where if we could make our people 10 times more efficient from the current version of themselves, then you start having a pretty good base case for investing. But tracking that one into professional functions is a little bit different than it is when you're actually creating code or moving it through a constant deployment pipeline and regressing that. Taking it to the client side, just give a couple of other examples where we've seen AI really successfully deployed is in things like going back to Diana's point about media planning. If you can imagine a world where media planning across a couple hundred retailers that we service, their brands that they're hoping to sell products for, if advertising works effectively, you're dealing with an entirely new landscape of media. It doesn't benefit from any of the old programmatic capabilities that we see with publishing today, and so on and so forth. So AI is very good at allocating budgets in places where Colgate products are stocked, where they're more likely to be bought if the right product recommendation is made, if the catalog feed is clean, and if the advertisement is incredibly relevant. And we've also seen some extended success where making the advertising itself more informational, meaning taking it to conversation, and this is very early, but giving a consumer the ability to validate what they're looking at, to learn more about it. The more common use cases that we're all experiencing with OpenAI or any of the other large models is something that you can see emerging slowly but successfully. Because consumers are starting to do this instead of search. We all are doing it instead of search as we knew it. So it's more about where you put that experience in order for it to be accessed and then do some test and learn and iteration.
Okay. How are businesses navigating the ethical the ethical landscape while still trying to be innovative. And I want to start with you, Todd, because I know you have some thoughts on this specifically in regards to the EU, and you just recently moved from Paris. I wanted to get that out there. So what have you seen?
Yeah, Europe was a very interesting experience for me, having grown up here in the States, and I'm happy to be back. But I deeply enjoyed the experience of seeing how regulation, especially as it relates to not just AI, but to data, and to monopoly was being deployed. So you've got the Digital Markets Act, the Data Services Act, and you've got the AI Act most recently. So what's interesting is you've got an entirely different perspective in Europe about how to think about ethics at the front end of business design. I liken it to privacy by design that we all started talking about from a purely data sharing perspective, now being applied to AI. So to make it tangible, the idea for my company to be able to share information with Reuters as a place to place an advertisement for a Colgate product, a retailer where that product is being bought, and indeed Diana's team, is a really, really tricky challenge. It requires not just potential data sharing, but potential data security risk, ethical risk, and so on and so forth. So if you don't begin with the concept of how am I setting up a product pipeline that's not just privacy by design, but AI by design, you're really sort of falling behind at this point, because the world is very much wanting to experiment with these things. So deploying synthetic data as a way to potentially reduce the risk, keeping data at state where it belongs, and maybe just querying part of it from a modeled perspective are examples of the things that we see working. And again, just having an AI by design viewpoint as you go into that experimentation is something that we've done more and more and been more successful with our partners.
Diana or David, anyone want to add to that?
Well, I mean, we serve a set of customers that think about ethics all the time, which are lawyers. they have ethical guidance on how they do their work, and so what we've actually seen is that there's been this sort of groundswell of user-based and sort of industry-driven ethics guidelines and best practices which have come up. There's been, I think, a lot of focus, at least within the legal industry, to start to put frameworks around what's the best way to use these products, how do you make sure that you're using them ethically, how do you check and make sure you don't forego your professional obligations to your clients, your customers, et cetera. And I think that's been incredibly helpful because on top of it, companies like us and other software vendors have adopted AI principles to develop, but what we've actually found is that there's much more risk and much more danger in the users. That you can develop systems which have protections, but users are able to exploit powerful products in lots of different ways. And so it's much more, I think, about how do you create the right norms and the right guidelines for user communities to make sure that products are used effectively. I mean, I think one thing's interesting, just to reflect on the marketing industry, is we're seeing a ton of uses of Gen AI for the creation of marketing copy, for marketing materials, for websites, and that presents all sorts of ethical concerns because of misinformation which is being produced. There's only so much that can be done by the vendors of those tools, right? There needs to be ethical guidelines which are adopted by the industry to say, how do we use this safely? And what are the stamps of approval that we're going to put on websites to say, hey, I decided to use AI using these guidelines so that you can feel more confident, more safe, and also provide signals to industry participants about whether or not that data is useful, relevant, et cetera, searchable, indexable.
Yeah, I think your point about users is a key one, and the way we're thinking about that at Colgate in terms of the employee base is just, a human in the loop. That concept is key to our AI strategy. And so, I'm not going to be sitting next to everyone in the company who's using our AI tools all day, making sure they're doing it the correct way. So we have a responsible AI framework. We have things like just mandatory training that employees have to participate in and complete before they're able to access the AI tools that we have. We've also embedded it in our code of conduct and tied it specifically to Colgate's values. So, one of the great things about Colgate is that there is a culture of kind of desire for continuous upskilling and learning and curiosity. And so we had a few years back, created a data literacy and analytics academy and rolled that out. We have over 14,000 people globally who've taken it. They earned badges, they posted them on LinkedIn, they were very engaged with it. And so I think that sort of laid the groundwork for all the AI training that we were rolling out. And we found that people were excited, like they wanted to experiment with this, they wanted to learn more, and they want to do it safely and responsibly. And when we're, we're providing those sort of sandboxes and safe environments for them to do that in, we need to make sure they also are aware of, what that could mean and making sure it's consistent with their values. But that's such a key part of that, and I think educating users has to be where the focus is for that.
And also what kind of company you want to be. That's
Exactly.
about, regardless of what the law or the regulations say, it's deciding
Exactly.
what kind of company you want to be and how you make sure all of your employees buy into that and know how to be that type of company. Let's talk future, and you touched on this a little bit, Todd. I'm gonna let you expound upon it. So, what do you think, based on what the current trends are that we're seeing, which industries do you think are really about to explode in the future based on what the capabilities of AI are now? And I know that you've talked about advertising, and I want all of you to be able to answer this question, but.
I mean, it's underway with advertising, and I tend to have a bit more of a myopic and focused view, but I laid out advertising first, but advertising and retail, indeed commerce in general, is all intertwined around this axle of monetization, where merchandising products and selling products, creating the content that is informing the decision, hopefully not misinforming the decision about the way a product is perceived. All of that is changing in front of our eyes very quickly, and it's tricky because from a product perspective, you have to do the work of today's workflows, today's organizations, the things that people trust and understand and have frameworks to operate ethically within, but you also have to get ahead of that. I see the next 2 or 3 years being dramatically reshaping to publishing, the way content and user experiences are created. Really, I think you could potentially throw the CMS out the window as we know it today, the content management system, pardon me. The same thing is probably true with the entire advertising technology stack, which is by nature overcomplicated and fraught with different issues of risk. And then retail itself, I think we look at that as being maybe a slightly longer term, because all of us who have a favorite retailer are thinking about logistics, we're thinking about trust. Do we trust that we're going to get the right thing? Is it not fraudulent? Can we return it more quickly? Do we get our loyalty points? Is the price right? Is it in stock? And yada, 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 yada. So you can't just change retail overnight, but the idea that each of us may have a personal shopper at some point, our own agent, to do that work for us, meaning to go out and interact with other information, quite possibly other agents and other models, while we sort of kick back and do less of the prompting and the prompt engineering that Diana was talking about, I think is a lot closer than we're probably giving ourselves credit for. But I think in that order: advertising, very ripe; publishing, very ripe; and then retail, right over the horizon would be my guess.
So I'd agree on advertising, media, and content, but I'm going to answer from a slightly different perspective. So I think it's going to impact every single person in this room. And I think the way that we operate in our daily lives at work will be fundamentally transformed over the coming years in a positive way. When I think about because of the democratization, I think is what I'm thinking about Gen AI. So with traditional AI and machine learning, you needed to learn to code or understand algorithms to actually interact with that. But this is inherently democratized. All of us in our daily lives can interact with Gen AI and use it for various tasks, on top of what companies like all of ours are doing to provide products for people. So I think that it's actually going to be transformational, unlike other things that have kind of gone through the hype cycle and had a lot of initial buzz and maybe didn't actually come to fruition. I do think this will change the way that we all work across, no matter what industry or function that you're in.
Maybe I'll answer the question in a little bit more of a sort of a techie, nerdy way. If I look at what the models of today are good at, they're still very good at managing text, images, and sound, right? So it's all about kind of information processing, and what they haven't been great at is at dealing with either numerical information or to deal with complex workflows. And a lot of the work that we're seeing from the big kind of AI vendors is to push towards either greater reasoning or agentic technology, which will allow for more complex workflows. So if we extrapolate that, I think there's a bunch of industries which start to get kind of very interesting. I think one is any business which is more numerical in nature, that deals with a lot of numerical data or has to do reasoning over that information, or that has tools which are used to reason over that information. And so an example for us is tax. So there's always this joke, when can the AI do my taxes for me?
Yes, that was my last question.
Is that the last question?
Yeah.
And that's what we're working on.
Thank you.
But to do that, we need to we actually teach the AI how to use the tax calculator, the tax engine. It's not going to have the tax law all in its brain. It's going to have access to tax calculators and tax engines like a TurboTax and figure out how to use it, how to plug in the right data, how to validate the results out of it. And it's this combination of old tech and new tech. I think this type of innovation, if you kind of extrapolate it out, means huge things for financial industry, for other parts of risk, insurance. There's industries which right now are experimenting with AI, but now not so much in their core business, a little bit more on like customer service and things like that. I think fundamental ways that financial transactions are conducted, or the way that the financial industry works, could be upended by AI in the future.
Well, on that note, David's going to be doing our taxes for us. That's what I got. But seriously, David, Diana, Todd, thank you very much for this panel.
Thank you.
Yeah.